Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by AgSouth Farm Credit. We're trying to get moisture any way we can, and over the last 7 days, most of that moisture has kind of come to us via Texas. It's kind of come out of the Gulf Coast, and it's made its way at times over into parts of the Southeast. But overall, when you look back to the last 45 to 60 days, we did see considerable dryness start to move into the area. And yes, it was a bit of a missed forecast overall. We had expected, I think, closer to normal precipitation, knowing that the later we got into November and toward December, our chances for rainfall would begin to improve again. But it seems as though here we are working our way toward like halfway through this month and still not seeing substantial moisture return to the area. Now, this was through early Sunday morning, and since then, if we just look at what happened throughout the day on Sunday, getting into late Sunday night, we can see here that we did have some moisture that kind of moved through parts of North Carolina and got out early on Sunday. And as we finish this up, though, there is another round of moisture still coming through parts of Texas. So overall, we need to diagnose where this pattern can take us and if there's any longer-term risks in terms of deepening this drought before we start to get some better moisture into place. But just to cap this off with a couple of stats here, this is the beginning of a water year. We define a water year in the United States from October 1st to September 30th. And if you just have a look here, since the beginning of this new water year, we have a lot of places throughout the whole of the Southeast, up to the Mid-Atlantic, back to parts of the Mid-South here, and then all the way down to Louisiana, where we've been in such exceptional drought for so many months now. Well, a lot of these stats continue to show us that we're in that lower half of the distribution over the last 131 years in terms of precip. It's been very, very dry throughout the Appalachian Mountains, though, getting into North Carolina. Now, because of that, we've seen some expansion on the newest drought monitor. And again, this is a bit against what I think we thought, or what I thought would be happening in November. I thought by the time we got to November, we would see a bit better subtropical flow delivering more of the rainfall like we got last week, but just more of that coming through. So as of November the 9th, this is the latest update we've got. And if we just take a look at the change maps, we can see that just in the last week, drought has expanded another class here, everywhere that you see this shade of color. If I just take this out and take it out 4 weeks, this has been where our greatest drought expansion has been so far this fall. So we asked ourselves, does either the Atlantic or the Pacific hold any sort of hope to getting this jet stream to get into a configuration that's going to help? And I think the help is going to come from the Pacific rather than the Atlantic as we go forward. Now, at this point in November, I don't have any, big ideas about what's going to control the winter other than our El Nino narrative. What I mean by that is the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Arctic Oscillation, the polar vortex, all of these big features that can drive large systems up the East Coast. We're not yet there. We're not talking about those yet because they're yet to become fully established, which means what's coming on the upstream side of the flow, here in the Pacific, seems to be dominating what's going on. So I'd like to show you that, and then we were going to dig a little bit deeper into when our next couple of chances for precipitation are going to be. So right now, instead of showing you like the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation, which I know a lot of you are very familiar with on the East Coast, I'm going to take you to what's called the Pacific North American pattern, or Pacific North American Oscillation. And what I'm honestly looking for here are any times where this value comes way up above average. Because if that happens, that's a sign for a huge ridge in the West Coast. And if it just kind of dances down here near average or below average like we're expecting it, this is a signal for deeper troughs developing in the West. And that's going to influence where our temperature pattern is going to come from and where our moisture is going to come from. So right now, the story being told for the Atlantic is really being written in the Pacific. And here we are tucked in between in the Southeast, okay? All right, so let's go have a look at what I'm talking about. Now, we have seen repeatedly over the last couple of weeks just really, really strong pieces of the jet stream just flying across the open Atlantic Ocean. But it's really been the behavior of the Pacific, episodes of blocking or episodes of really enhanced what we call zonal flow, where the jet stream just screams out of the west. That's kind of set us up for what we've seen. Now, to be honest, what I need to see happen in this pattern is I need the subtropical jet to really engage, because it seems as though this November, that's going to be the trajectory on the jet stream that's going to finally get some moisture into our area. So I just played this through to Wednesday, and going out there toward the weekend into Thursday and Friday, you'll see how this pattern isn't fully set up to just blast us with a couple of big storm systems going forward, but it's starting to become a bit more conducive the farther out we go. Now, what I'm looking at and what I'm looking for is just this. Okay, I like to see the subtropical jet meeting up with the polar jet, and I like to see speed over us. So by this weekend and early next week, we start to see some of that happening. Now, going beyond that, it doesn't appear as though the atmosphere really wants to calm down as we get out there toward Thanksgiving and a little bit beyond. Even though the jet retracts a little bit in the Pacific, there's still quite a bit of flow going across the country, and that's why most of the week 2 forecasts look wet for nearly everyone. But it's all about timing, and we need to figure out when and where these systems are going to come through. So I want to give you 2 different approaches on your next 10 days, okay? The first view is going to be a 10-day forecast for precipitation anomalies, so we're comparing this to normal, as provided by the ECMWF ensemble. So what does all that mean? This means we run the European model 101 times, each with slight small changes, and we look for consistency. We do that because there is oftentimes errors in the initial conditions, like the initial observations. And so we try to account for those errors by running the model hundreds of times with little tiny changes to see how robust a solution is. Long story short, when you use an ensemble approach to forecasting, you tend to do better than when you just use a single model run. Now, the map I've been talking over says over the next 10 days, which gets us all the way out there to the day before Thanksgiving, what are we seeing overall in terms of our precipitation pattern? And what you notice that most of AgSouth territory is near normal with a bit slight wet bias farther to the south. Now, this is the 101 different forecasts all put into one. This is the single forecast. Now, the ECMWF runs every 6 hours, and every 12 hours we get a new 10-day forecast out of it. Every 6 hours we get only a run that goes out about 5 or 6 days. So we're going to look at the 12Z run on Sunday. And notice it's a bit drier farther to the north, but certainly along the Gulf Coast, getting into southern Georgia, maybe parts of South Carolina, it is showing considerable wetness, maybe up to an inch more than normal. That's what that means. So if you got a 0.72 there, that's 0.72 of an inch more than the average. Now, I kind of sped through that because I'm just trying to look at what's going to be controlling this to give you a broader picture. So the most important thing, honestly, for the whole of the south and southeast is this is our area that is absolutely deepest in drought. I mean, if you remember, just go back to the drought monitor here, look at the current map, that is the area that has exceptional drought on it. So to start to see precipitation hitting the Gulf Coast is going to be critical to a lot of things, including shipping traffic and all sorts of other operations we have going on down here. So let's get a sense of the timing. We're just going to use the European model today. It's got the better simulations over the weekend. I've got a bit more trust in it, so let's use it. As we work our way through the day on Monday, getting into Monday evening, the next big tropical pulse of moisture, comes out of Texas and Louisiana. It's going to try to spread late in the week into parts of AgSouth territory. I'm talking by Wednesday. The problem is to our north, there's a big area of high pressure, and that big area of high pressure is keeping much of this moisture farther to the south. So going from Tuesday night to Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon and evening, getting into Thursday and Friday, did you kind of see where that moisture stayed? It pretty much stayed south, maybe south of that line there. We then notice there's a system that's going into eastern Canada, and it's leaving a front here. And that's what might give us a late week shot, watch Friday into Saturday, of getting some rain right here in parts of the mid-Atlantic, North Carolina up to Pennsylvania. Now, watch this all week. There has been some kind of tropical, I don't know what you want to call them, disturbances that have been coming out of the Caribbean. And should this one, by late this week, have a little bit more of a westward bias to it, it could add some late week rainfall to the east. We're going to have to just keep an eye on it overall. But going from Friday into Saturday and then into Sunday, the big question a lot of us have is this system that's just going to sit and spin over California all week long going to eject over the weekend and show up here? Because if it makes it to the Midwest, watch this front. Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday, it comes right over the top of us. Now, remember, this is out there pretty far in a single run. And what I'm rocking back and forth over is next Sunday night through next Tuesday. Next Sunday night through next Tuesday. Now, what I see in this particular pattern is if this manifests itself as currently forecast, it would be a pretty good setup for strong to severe storms as well. All right, next Monday into Tuesday. Watch that carefully. You can see also the rest of the country is going under a lot of adverse weather as well. Look at all that snow that could be coming in with these next two systems. But they're way out there in the forecast. So what I want to know is, what's the likelihood of getting that out there next Monday? Okay, next Monday, Tuesday, we're going to go have a close look at it. Because if it comes through like it's being forecast, well, this is what it'll do to the rainfall totals. This is what we're expecting through Thursday and Friday of this week. And there's that weak front, watch it here, Friday night to Saturday, that tries to deliver some rain up here into Virginia, North Carolina. Other than that, it's watching the early week tropical pulse push along the Gulf Coast, getting into some of AgSouth territory down here in parts of southern Georgia. Now, from Saturday into Sunday and Monday, look, there's the system we're talking about. See it coming through there? And will it get to us? Because if it does, next Monday into Tuesday, that's the time frame bringing in some possibly strong to severe storms, if that storm system is being manifest properly in the model right now. Okay? Now, there's good reason to think it's going to be there because I'm getting some ensemble support. For example, next Monday night, that's 0Z on Tuesday, that's 6 p.m. Monday night, the ensembles are all tossing down a low right here. And you can see the model agreement. There's actually two of them, one in the Pacific Northwest and one in the central United States. So we're getting some better agreement overall in the model. And should this low come out and race toward the northeast, there is the risk of those stronger storms across the south and southeast. But you know, it's interesting. I'm just talking about stuff that's a week after this one. So we've still got a lot of time before this gets here. So maybe we should look at some probabilities. You see the chance over the next 10 days of keeping less than a half inch of rainfall in the forecast. We're down here in this 10 to 40% chance. Okay. So there's a better chance you get more than a half inch over the next 10 days than otherwise. But it's not as though it's super wet. You see, this is the probability of getting over an inch in the next 10 days. And for Georgia having the highest at 50 to 60% and then dropping as you go farther to the north, I think this is what we got. We've got the first pulse early this week. We then have the weekend front that comes through, the system that kind of comes up the east coast but stays offshore, and then the big low next Monday that if it goes through, drives the front end of the area, brings us some strong to severe storms. Did you notice that's not a whole lot of like discussion about a big, robust storm system that just delivers drought-ending rainfall, right? And then by the time we get out here to day 10, look what the jet stream's up to. It's got itself all blocked up in the Pacific. And there's a big ridge here in Alaska creating what we call an omega pattern, which means we're going to be storing up some cold air in this area. And there has been ridging up the east coast, which means these storm systems that could be coming out here around Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving, I mean, they could be substantial and really get cranking. And that's why some of the week 2 models, like what's from the CPC and what came out from the European model, are wet. I mean, wet in these areas that are desperate to get moisture. So there is a bit of a story coming into next week. But as I showed you, this week, just be watching southern Georgia. We have a chance at getting a late week front that comes through. And then we're going to start to watch next weekend and early next week for the main activity coming through parts of AgSouth territory. So what are the temperatures going to do? We got a couple of chilly mornings that are coming up here. This is the risk of a frost. So we've got some chilly morning coming up here in North Carolina. But this is not uncommon for mid-November. If you take a look at what the temperature is going to do, here's Monday's high, still a little cool across AgSouth territory. Tuesday's still a little chilly, but watch. By Wednesday, this is going to be our last bit of cooler air here. We start to warm up Thursday into Friday. And then we're going to watch a quick front try to come through late in the week. So how's your temperatures going to go? Got a cooler start. Look at this, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then we warm up Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's how the next several days are going to be panning out. But take a look at this. This is your next 5 days, okay? Then this is day 5 through 10, mild. But watch the west, because day 10 through 15, this would be the week of Thanksgiving, into the week following, there's a big change. Now, just a reminder, every time we see cold air coming in this way, and there's warm air this way, right in the middle is where the action's going to be. And if lows start kicking off in this area, they drag their fronts through us increasing the risk of strong to severe storms, and we cannot ignore that. So we've kind of talked about it several times. That's what I'm starting to see. Now, the newest update from our government, from the CPC, was just released on Friday, and they see a lot more of the same going into the end of November and the first week of December. So you see they've got us wet and they've got us mild. The only way you get this pattern is to have a trough ridge pattern like this. So see it dipping down here, going wet in California, running up over with the subtropical jet sneaking underneath. I mean, there's a lot to this pattern that I agree with. And our newest European model just came out and said, hey, let's go all the way look out there to Christmas. So this would be the 25th of November to the 25th of December. And again, it's got the flow. I mean, look at that. So is it continuing to show up later in the forecast? Yes. Was the fall drought well predicted? No. But is there hope that this is going to be the case? There is. And that hope is right here in this pattern. There's plenty of warm water in the Atlantic. That's good for the heat transfer. That's good for the moisture transfer. There is the El Niño, which likes to give us some subtropical flow. The cold water here could help reinforce troughs in the west, and all that does is just increase our chances of getting better transport of moisture and better storms. This makes a lot of sense to me, as does the movement of the trade winds. You see, this right now is what we call a big westerly wind burst, meaning that we're getting a sense, a hint, that El Niño is beginning to capture more of this pattern. But still, holding the pattern hostage is this. These are all strong easterly winds in the Indian Ocean that are all a part of what's called the Indian Ocean dipole. Now, what's the net effect of all of it? The net effect is the jet stream, which it responds to the MJO, is likely going to stay in a very similar configuration to what I'm about to show you, because we think the MJO is going to have a hard time leaving phases 8 and 1. That's over by Africa or out into the Western Pacific. They're kind of the same phase. It's going to stay away from the Indian Ocean. It's going to stay away from Australia, but it's going to try to live out in this area, phase 8 and 1. Now, let me just distill that down into something useful for you. It means this. That's what November, phase 8 of the MJO typically does. We tend to get, look, omega blocks. We tend to get more ridging up the East Coast. And if you get systems that come around and go in between this, they tend to keep the south a bit more mild, and they tend to keep the south, I guess, more primed for late season thunderstorm activity. So I cannot rule that out right now. Longer term, newest update I can give you is going to be from the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Now, this has been the best performing suite of models for several months now. And again, they have got most of your territory for December, January, and February on the wetter side of it. So I'm just starting to build up a bit more of a story in my mind that this El Niño is going to be affecting the southeast in a way that's not going to prolong our drought situation, but start to bring in some relief in it. It's just not coming this week, but it could start very soon. Maybe we finish November and really get into December with much better flow. That's at least the indications I'm currently getting. Okay, I want to finish this up with some international weather. We're going to start first with planting progress in Mato Grosso. Heat and drought took them off of this good pace and have now brought them down well below average and at the bottom here of the 5-year average. Now you'll notice we're like, wait, that's 91% planted, normal's 96. You know, it's not as, our normal's 95. You look at that and go, okay, does that matter? It does, because we think a lot of this, which we could say would be roughly 25% of the crop, was getting planted at a time when the conditions were not favorable. And as we look forward, watch this animation. All the way through the next week, I'm playing this fast for you. No precipitation really in the forecast for the next 5 to 7 days across a substantial portion of Brazil. There's still flooding in southern Brazil, very little in Argentina. But the models are trying. They're trying their hardest to bring in rainfall way late in the time period. I'm going to tell you something. That's often an artifact of the model. It's like at the end of it, it's like, just bring in the moisture. So if I show you this another way, let's go to the ECMWF ensemble. I'm going to take you back to the 12Z run, and I want to show you a 15-day anomaly. This is some very, very dry conditions. And during this time period, it's flooding in southern Brazil, which is where most of the yield variability comes from, is southern Brazil, not northern Brazil, but southern Brazil. There's a big problem brewing down here we have to keep looking at. And at the same time all of this dryness is coming in north, the temperatures are expected to be hot. By this Thursday, this map shows you the probability of going over 100 Fahrenheit. So you have a huge section of Brazil with an 80 to 100% chance of having a high temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to be hot. And it's not just hot there. I mean, look around the planet for the next 10 days. There's quite a bit of mild air that's building in here. We have questions as to the source of this. There's been some discussion about some peer-reviewed papers coming out about the Tonga eruption, which happened about right there, that blew up in January of 2022, increasing stratospheric water vapor, influencing global temperatures for about a decade. But the other thing to point out here is there's still some contrast, and that big contrast is between Scandinavia and Europe. And that's what's driving a lot of storm activity through Europe. A lot of windy conditions, very wet. It gets into the Russian wheat belt, gets into Turkey, and it extends all the way over to Siberia. Other than that, seeing rain in Australia when there's an El Niño, that's pretty rare. A lot of activity going right through Central Africa. There's the flooding in southern Brazil, the dryness north. And I want to take you lastly to Panama right here. We've been watching the Panama Canal now for months. We know there's been dryness that have hit the lake between the two big parts of the canal. Question is, if they get good rain in December, can they get rid of their major, drought problems and get some normal traffic flowing? If they don't get that moisture by December, we'll be talking about the drought in the Panama Canal cleared in next June, because we start the dry season there once we get into January. So I'll leave you with this global map here. But just want you to know some of the big things I'm thinking about, and we'll talk again next week. Thank you.